Welcome back to Parashat Pantry, everyone. It is almost Passover and also the time of year when we study Parashat Tzav, which comes to us from the book of Leviticus, starting with chapter 6. This entire Torah portion is about the sacrifices that the Israelites would make to God and that the priests would perform on their behalf. There are several different types of offerings or sacrifices that are described. The burnt offering, the meal offering, the anointment offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, and the offering of well-being. Most folks get to this Torah portion and they say, what am I going to do with this Torah portion? It's all about sacrifices. Well, I want us to think about the sacrifices in the Torah a little bit differently as we study it this year. We have to remember that this was ancient ritual. This was the Israelites' attempts to connect with God, to be in relationship with God, and to do what they believe was God's will. So what do you do when you really care about someone? You give them gifts, or you make sacrifices for them. You might do something that is difficult for yourself, but is lovely for someone else. So this was the intention behind making the sacrifices to God. The sacrifice was also considered a mode of communication. And that's how I want to think about it. It basically was the technology that the Israelites used to connect with God. In modern Jewish ritual, we use prayer or words or the offerings of our heart in order to connect with God. But in the ancient days, they used sacrifice as their form of communication. So I think the lesson for this week is that choosing your form of communication wisely is really important to do. You have to be thoughtful when you communicate with someone. You have to think about how these words or this communication might land with them and how it might be meaningful. So that's what I want us to think about as we think about Parashat Tzav. Instead of running in the other direction because it's all about sacrifice, we could think about it in a different way. So we are going to prepare our Passover brisket, which is an easy recipe and also relates to this Torah portion because meat was one of the things that was given as a sacrifice to God. And we might find that difficult to think about, but really if you think about it, making a sacrifice on the altar was very similar to making a barbecue. And for a lot of people, that's a very pleasing thing to do. So for Passover, the meat that at least my family eats, I know many others do as well, is brisket. So I have here a 3 to 4 pound beautiful kosher brisket that was actually delivered by the butchery. And Ella has peeled a bag of carrots. I also have an onion that I'm going to cut up. And for our ingredients, there's a lot of different things that you can use. I think one of the secrets in my recipe is to use onion soup mix, is to slather the brisket in onion soup, which makes it nice and salty and gives it a great flavor. We also need a liquid. I like to use 4 cups of broth. Some people like to use ginger ale. We also need a tomato base. So I have a can of crushed tomatoes. It's about 28 ounces. And I also like to throw in a lot of ketchup as well. Very simple. All of these things simmered together in a Dutch oven turn out delicious. So I'm going to get started. As I said, Ella peeled this bag of carrots, and we're just going to lay the carrots on the bottom of the dish. And this does a few nice things. One is that the carrots come out delicious when they're finished, and you can serve them as a side dish. The other thing is that if you layer the bottom of the dish, it keeps the brisket off of the bottom from burning and gives it a little bit of space for the juices to fully surround it in the pan. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the carrots at the bottom. And I'm going to surround them with a chopped onion. Just gonna sprinkle the onions around the edge. And next goes in the brisket. I'm going to lay the brisket in with the fat up. And then I'm going to pour the onion soup mix right over top and rub it in kind of like a rub. We're gonna wash our hands. And otherwise, we're just gonna pour everything else on top. So, the tomatoes, ketchup, and the broth. I'm going to put the lid on this and put it into a 350-degree oven for 3 hours. And I'm making this a few days before Passover because once it's done cooking, I'm going to let it cool, and then I'm either going to put it in the fridge in its juices or freeze it. And on the day of Passover, just a few hours before the meal, we are going to take it out, slice it, and then reheat, and that's going to make it really nice and juicy. So that is it on our lesson from Parashat Tzav as we prepare for Passover. I want to say happy Passover to everyone. Next week we will take the week off from Parashat Pantry as we will be reading a special portion for Passover, but we will resume the week after. So have a great Passover, everyone.
Sweet as honey, sweet as honey.